For Victims and Villains, my name is Josh, and today we are going into the mind of Stephen King, Mike Flanagan, and Loki. This is The Life of Chuck. Life of Chuck is a post-apocalyptic drama sci-fi film that tells the story of a gentleman by the name of Chuck Krantz and the mystery and legacy of his life. I gotta say, I don't know what any of the trailers for this film looks like. Just kind of coming out of this film, I can't imagine being the studio exec that had to figure out how to market this movie, because as a critic, I don't even know really where to begin with this movie. This movie is unconventional in almost every sense of that word. Not only is this movie told out of chronological order, kind of consider the movie irreversible and kind of how that movie is structured if you've seen it, where it kind of starts at necessarily a portion of the end, tells that story, and then reverses it kind of a couple of different times throughout the course of this movie. Now, I know the structure in and of itself might be enough to just kind of turn people off from it just alone. It is kind of a really weird decision, but I think it really does work for this film. It kind of gives this film this unintentional anthology feel to it. Like, this movie kind of structurally also reminded me of Trick or Treat, and kind of how it's stories where you're seeing all of these elements that you feel like are isolated, and then you kind of get to the climax of it and you kind of see how all of these pieces connect. And what I really like about The Life of Chuck is that there's this element of ambiguity to it, to where there are parts that happen in the beginning of the film that you feel like don't necessarily connect, but yet characters just kind of randomly show up for no rhyme or reason. So you're kind of left with this question of how much of this is real, how much of this is not. And that, again, this is probably Flanagan's most ambitious project to date. And that's partially really why I think this film works as well as it does, is because you have someone like Flanagan at the helm for this movie. Flanagan has really established himself as one of the best storytellers in working in the genre of horror and horror adjacent projects. And whether you like everything that he does, or there's maybe even some of his miniseries, if there's a couple episodes where you're kind of like, I don't really think this was good, but you have to admit that he is still one of the best working today, whether you're talking about the greatness of Hush and Dr. Sleep in previous adaptations, or you're talking about the magnitude and projects like Midnight Mass and the Haunting series. This guy just knows what he's doing, and I think you look at this film and you look how ambitious it is, but also the emotions that it conveys and draws out of you as a viewer is just absolutely, I mean, I'm not going to call this his magnum opus, because I do have a few problems with it. I'll get into them in just a second, but I think overall this is one of the best things that he has done, and it's definitely, certainly, I would dare say, the most ambitious project he's done to date. Probably one of my small complaints about this movie is the actual character of Chuck, our titular hero, our protagonist, the guy that this entire character study is based around. As I mentioned at the beginning, the structure of this is essentially told in 3 acts, but they're backwards, so you go 3, 2, 1. And it just kind of seemed like when we actually do get to meet Chuck, it seems like it's this very... Tom Hiddleston does a great job here. Let me just get that out of the way. Tom Hiddleston is phenomenal here. But when we actually get to his Chuck, it is this, like... It just feels like the other characters and the other acts really got to feel like breathed and fleshed out, and his just kind of seemed very minuscule. Very kind of surface level, especially considering the fact of how big of a mystery he was in the first act of the film, the actual act, not the act 1. And then also at the same time, just it seems like he's kind of on, then he's off, and it was kind of that was kind of disappointing. There were also parts in the final act of the movie where you kind of get to explore Chuck's childhood. I felt like I really wish that it would have, the time that we spent with Chuck at the different ages would have felt a little bit more fleshed out. Like Chuck, so we meet Chuck kind of at like very young, at like age like 6 or 7, then we fast forward to him at 10, 11, and then you kind of get to see him on the verge of adulthood. And I kind of felt like the 6-year-old version of Chuck and the 17-year-old version of Chuck didn't really get a whole lot of screen time, didn't really get to kind of get to see fleshed out. Like that was another thing that I really wish this film would have done. And again, this is an ambitious project. I'm not going to say it's not, but you can definitely see that had Flanagan had more time to really flesh these characters out, I really think this is a story that really could have benefited from a complete other hour of just kind of getting to see these. This is one film that I would really like to see a director's cut for, and I think it could benefit from it because it definitely feels like structurally some of the pacing with the portions of the story that we want to see kind of fleshed out just don't really feel fleshed out. And it kind of seems like for a movie based around a character named Chuck, you don't really get to spend as much time with Chuck as I think as a viewer you should. It's also really hard to kind of pinpoint one performance in here that is excellent. Like all of the marketing in this movie, people know that Tom Hiddleston is in this movie. That's no secret. He is kind of the face of this movie, and for good reasons. I mean, he is our titular character, but he is one among many exceptional performances. And I'm going to butcher a few of these names, so bear with me. Chiwetel Elijofor, I think is how you say his name, but he is excellent in this movie. I really loved his performance. Him and Kieran Gillian kind of open up this film, and they're kind of exploring their relationship amongst the impending apocalypse. I thought that kind of having that love story and kind of it running parallel with like who is Chuck. Like I thought that it was a really beautiful discovery, and I loved their chemistry together. They were fantastic in this movie. A lot of Flanagan's traditional players that you've seen over the course of many of his projects return for this one. They're also really well done and really well placed here as well. Mark Hamill's also in this movie. Exceptional performance. Matthew Lillard shows up for a few scenes. Also exceptional. Pick up Tremblay, again, reminding us that he is one of the best young actors working in Hollywood today. And I'm kind of honestly surprised that between his comic timing in Good Boys a few years ago, as well as his performances in movies like this and Wonder, that he's not a bigger star. But he reminds us again of why he's great. And he only has maybe 10 to 20 minutes in this movie overall playing a version of Chuck. This movie is hard to describe genre-wise as well. It's partially sci-fi with this impending apocalypse kind of coming on, but it's also this beautiful character study, and it also somehow ends up being this like entire metaphor for living life to the fullest and not being afraid to live. And I think that that is something that is so beautiful and so refreshing to kind of see. But I think one of the things that this movie does incredibly so well is the way that it draws the emotions, not only out of the characters, but out of its audience. And I think that that needs to also be mentioned, that it's the score from the lovely Newton brothers that do a phenomenal job. This is easily one of my favorite scores that I have heard from in quite a while. This is really one that really stood out to me and really amplifies the emotional elements that Flanagan and his actors draw and bring to these characters into this world. And I really just kind of thought it was so beautifully done and so lovely and so orchestrated. Just made me feel some kind of way. This movie is thought-provoking, it's heartwarming, it's heart-wrenching, it draws out so many different emotions. There's the comedy hits here. This is a movie that just knows what it wants to be, and it just doesn't give a fuck, and I love that. And with that said, let's run this one through our Rorschach rating scale. I'm going to go ahead and give The Life of Chuck a 4.5 out of 5. Overall, I think this is one of, if not Flanagan's most ambitious project to date. This movie is stunning, it's gorgeous, it's emotional, it's comedic, it's sci-fi, it hits all of these notes that you want. It bends genres in really unexpected ways. It has a really unconventional structure that just seems to really work for it. And all of the emotions that Flanagan and his cast bring forward are elevated and amplified thanks to the score from the Newton brothers. This is one of my favorite scores that I've heard in a long time, especially at least all of 2025. I think my biggest problem with this movie is I really wish that certain stages of Chuck's actual life felt a little bit more fleshed out than they do. I would love to see a director's cut of this, and I'm really hoping that Neon will allow it to produce it if there is one. But overall, this is a phenomenal movie, and it will go down as one of the best films of this year. If you guys have seen The Life of Chuck, what did you guys think? Comment below and let me know. If you guys have read the short story and you saw the movie, how does it compare? Let's talk about it. I think that this is going to probably be the next book, or at least short story, that I end up checking out. So I'm excited. Well, with that said, let's talk about mental health, shall we? If you guys are new to our content here at Victims and Villains, we create content like what you're watching right now, simply to talk about mental health through pop culture, and we use this moment of the video right now to pick a point of mental health or a theme out of the movie which we're reviewing, talk about it for a few moments in the hopes to deconstruct the stigma surrounding mental health. Without really getting into spoilers, the giant theme of this movie is being unafraid to really live your life and living life without regrets. And that is a lot easier said than done. I'll be really vulnerable with you guys. I am in a season of processing a lot of things that I thought that I had dealt with, and a lot of things that I had in my life that I thought that I had and now have a lot of regrets that I'm like still working my way through. So I feel like I'm not qualified to really speak on this, but I'm going to give it my best shot. Sometimes life is about reflecting. Sometimes life is about looking back at everything that we have and those moments where we said, hey, I could have done this better, and finding out how to actually make it better moving forward. I think a movie like The Life of Chuck and the story of Chuck and kind of the theme and where that theme is birthed out of is really beautiful, because sometimes it really does take some of the worst experiences of our lives to really draw out and remind us the frailty of life, but also at the same time why it is worth living, why community is important, why art is important for mental health. And and that list just kind of goes on and on and on. So I don't really have a whole lot to kind of expand, because again, I don't feel really qualified to talk about this. This movie is beautiful, and I typically don't recommend movies just solely based off of a theme of mental health, but I would encourage you to check this movie out, whether you see it in theaters and you get the theatrical experience, because I think at the end of the day, the theatrical experience is going to be the best way, because you're getting an experience. An experience is that reminder of why life is worth living for. And there's just an unspoken beauty that Flanagan brings to this role and brings to the conversation of mental health and life in general. Well, with that said, if you or someone you know is currently watching this and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, please click the links in our show notes below to check out our mental health resource library. The Life of Chuck is now playing everywhere from Neon, so in the show notes you guys will find links to check out where it's playing near you, as well as the previously mentioned mental health resource library, along with links to our social media, movie reviews like this, links to our podcast network, how to support us on Patreon, as well as Paramount Plus, and the subscribe button. So until next time, remember to keep it classy, keep it spooky. Have a good night, guys.